How are you?
I'm good.
I'm hanging in there.
Well, good.
I'm loving the weather today and tomorrow, and then it goes back to.
Yeah,
That's fine.
So good.
bring people as they come.
Hi.
Okay, cool. Summer, do you want to introduce this
Hi.
that you put together?
My name is Summer Bridges. This is our Autism Forum, Autism Care Forum. This is Kelly Poolho. She is a music therapist at Easter Seals Midwest. This is Jennifer, if I butcher your last name. I would rather you pronounce it actually.
It's Carrasquillo.
There you go. She is the resource officer at Easter Seals Midwest, and she helps families with funding, and you do budget stuff too, don't you?
Funding, budget, admissions, a little bit of
All the money stuff. And of course, you know Kathy Ellis, Kathy from 8th District US.
Woo-hoo, yes.
Congress, weird. Hoping. And Taylor is going to be our moderator this evening.
Yep, cool. Well, thank you all for coming. If you all want to start, I know that Summer introduced you, but if you all are willing to introduce yourselves and just say a little bit about why you're on this panel. So what is it that you do? What does your organization do? All of those good things.
I will go first. My name is Jennifer Carrasquillo, and I am the Family Resource Specialist for Easter Seals Midwest for the Southeast region. Easter Seals Midwest is a statewide organization that supports individuals with developmental disabilities and autism. In Southeast Missouri, we support families and individuals in 19 counties. My role there is to coordinate admissions, coordinate insurance funding for families, help them navigate the process, which can be a labyrinth, for lack of a better word, and very time consuming, and definitely a test of patience. And I'm here because I would like to help people better understand what resources are out there, not only with Easter Seals, but in other parts of the state and on a national level, while they're waiting for in-home services or clinic services. And I think it's just really important because across Missouri, and in this part of the state in particular, there is a lack of resources for families, and with the fact that it is a largely rural population, small towns, lots of highway in between most people and Cape or Poplar Bluff. Economics are an issue for a lot of families. This is a really important issue for families to know what's available. How can we get resources to them, and how can they access them?
I'm Kelly Pudo. I'm a music therapist. I've been with Easter Seals probably longer than I should admit. I think this is my 19th year. I think the end of 19 years is in February. They're going to chase me out one day, but until then, I love it. I've seen a lot of changes in the state over that time with funding. One thing that I will say is funding is absolutely positively never secure. And it is so important to communicate with legislators, and anytime we get invited to have an opportunity to share what's important with legislators, that's huge. Whether you get in contact with your legislators in your district, or if you go to Jeff City for different rallies, it's all really, really important. Because they need to know where we stand and what we need, and there's no way for them to know if we don't let them know. Another hat that I wear is I'm also the chair of the task force for the state of Missouri for receiving recognition for music therapy credentials. So we have been working on licensure in the state, so I spend a lot of time at the Capitol. I feel like we go for the autism rally every year, and then we have a music therapy rally and all of that. And really, what's kind of nice, what they've told us about the music therapists going there constantly to talk to them, is they said, everybody else has lobbyists, and they have other people that come and talk, and they're like, we recognize all of the music therapists. I'm like, we don't have to budget for a lobbyist, so you're going to see our smiling faces if you're going to see anybody. But, we've been enough that they recognize us. They're like, oh, you're the music therapist. One year we took them all a shaker. And you could hear who down the hall had gotten their shaker and all of that. And we just really try to educate to make sure that people understand that Music therapy and the other services that we provide, our behavior analysis services, all of those are folks who have been to college through intense degree programs, and it's important that those people know what they're doing to help families who need help, particularly with individuals with autism spectrum disorders, which is my passion. So we just want to bring awareness to, hey, there's needs in these rural areas. I mean, we serve folks all the way over to West Plains. People don't realize that. Our 19 counties go to West Plains. So we have therapists that travel to West Plains a couple days a week from our Poplar Bluff office, or once a week, just to make sure those folks get services. And a lot of people just don't have transportation in the Boot Heel and over in the different areas. So it's really important that those families still have access to services, regardless of their ability of being able to get to it. You know, we bear some responsibility to make sure they can access some services.
Summer, would you like to explain what your connection is to the topic, why you chose to do this one?
I am a parent of a son with autism. He is an awesome little boy, but I also feel that this is an issue that needs to be spread wider than just our group, because it seems like autism families kind of stick together, but we don't go much outside the fold. And as the numbers tick up, we have to be more vocal, like you were saying about the funding and everything, but we also have to be more vocal inside our communities to let them know, hey, this is a group you need to pay attention to. And that's kind of why I put it together.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you, Summer. Kathy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Kathy Ellis, and I'm running for the 8th Congressional District. This is my second time around, and it's a lot easier the second time around. I know a lot of great people that I can call on. Yeah, this is a really important topic. You know, I've been a clinical social worker and an addictions counselor for over 30 years. So I come at everything from that perspective of being a clinician. And I understand what both of you are talking about. And, you know, one of the things that I'm going to be listening on this panel, as much as speaking, is I want to have an idea of what the perfect policy would look like on the federal level. And, you know, that's something, of course, you put a lot of good things in, and then as you negotiate, you could lose some things. But, you know, that would be so helpful to me. And what I want to do with some of these issues that are going on in this district, I want to have, if I'm elected, I want to have groups of people that are going to be my advisors that will help guide me in what that policy needs to look like. So I'm really glad to have you here. And, you know, I expect that I'm here as much to learn from you, so that I can do what I need to do for this district. So I'm really happy to be here, and you know, I'm just mentioning the music therapy thing. It is evidence-based. It has
Yes,
it is
you.
since actually 1994.
Yeah.
And so
Before, yes,
and
absolutely.
that means it's reimbursable.
Yes.
And guess what? It's not happening. And, you know, one of the things they've just passed a bill that's, you know, $1.8 million is supposed to be in the pipeline. That's a drop in the bucket. But where is it?
Right.
When is it coming to us? You know, that's one of the things in rural areas. We don't get everything in a timely manner. So that's a concern.
Yes. Absolutely.
Awesome. So Summer helped me put together some questions for this. If you all have questions, since we're a smaller group, feel free to just, you know, shout them out, raise your hand, whatever you feel comfortable
Or
with.
come up and be on the panel.
You can sit in a circle. That's Kathy's preferred method. If you prefer to write your, that's what she wanted to do these panels at first. We worked on it. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, there's some cards in the back. You're feeling free to write them and pass them up. So starting with sort of a basic question, Summer has suggested this. Can you all speak to a bit, what is autism, and how does someone get diagnosed with it?
Okay, so things, you know, it continues to evolve as we continue to understand more. There was a change in the last number of years for how they do the diagnostics, but it is a neurodevelopmental disorder. And there's, right now, the way that they look at it in the diagnostic and statistical manual is they look at two kind of main areas. There's deficits in social and social communication skills, and there's also deficits in repetitive behaviors. So those are the kind of the two hallmarks. They used to divide those out into 3 categories, but now they're pretty much in those 2 categories. And so they need to have a proper assessment. They a lot of times might go to a neurologist. There is a new program that I think Jennifer will probably speak about a little bit. There's a new ECHO program where they're trying to get more diagnostic centers out into the rural areas, because anyone who's tried to get a diagnosis knows that you will go on a waiting list, and you will sit on a waiting list for a while before you can get a diagnosis. And then once you get that diagnosis, the door to services is then open. And up until then, you know, we do have, of course, we have first steps, and if they show a greater than 50% delay, they can receive first step services. Music therapy is not covered in the first steps. But I do have a master's degree in special education, so I qualify as a special instructor, so I can sneak in the door, kind of.
There you go.
But anyway, there's lots of avenues that way, but getting a diagnosis is a huge issue in the state, and that's one of the reasons there's a new, well, it's not new anymore, but in 2010 we started the new center at SEMO, so there would be diagnosis and treatment for this area. But this ECHO program that Jennifer will discuss, I think has some real promise, so that families don't have to wait so long to get a diagnosis to access services.
That's right. There are several places in Missouri, and before I talk about that, I will just say that something that's key for families is to, be aware of developmental milestones. Request a list of those from your pediatrician or your primary care provider. Keep those check-ins when they're, under age 12 months, when you have to go every so many weeks. Keep them, stay in regular contact with your pediatrician. Ask them questions. Try to get your child around other children so that you can kind of see, is my child socializing or interacting similarly to other infants their age or toddlers their age. Accessing resources like Autism Speaks is also really beneficial, because while Easter Seals can provide a lot of training and supports, websites like Autism Speaks, organizations like that, have really comprehensive toolkits on their website for parents to, those developmental checklists, tips for what to do, and then a lot of times families need to be familiar with their insurance. Is your insurance going to cover an assessment? Making sure you understand the cost of that, and talking about that with your primary care provider, because a lot of times those diagnostic facilities will require a referral, and some insurance companies require you to make a referral. In Missouri, Medicaid covers those things at 100%, but you do have to have a referral from the pediatrician with Medicaid. And then I always tell families, get on as many waiting lists as you can. There's always cancellations. You can also ask for a cancellation list if the facility has one. A lot of times somebody will not show up, or they'll get in somewhere else sooner, and the facility will call and say, hey, we've had a cancellation tomorrow, can you make it here? So knowing that that's available, I think, is also kind of a sneaky way to get in a little bit quicker. And then, like Kelly was saying, the ECHO Autism program, it's in Missouri, it's hubbed in Columbia at the Thompson Center on the University of Missouri campus, and it's considered a super hub. And we have 2 ECHO Autism providers in Southeast Missouri now, one in Sikeston, Dr. Dahlbeck, and then one in Poplar Bluff, Dr. Prushoff. And so they're not able to assess and provide DMH worthy diagnoses, and they've gone through extensive training. And the ECHO program brings together an interdisciplinary team of neurologists, pediatricians, speech pathologists, social workers, and they meet twice a month, and they are able to work with the doctor to train them to know what to look for. They consult with each other about, particularly complicated or difficult cases, so that doctor now has that expertise to make a confident diagnosis in their home area, and families therefore aren't faced with the challenge of taking off work for an entire day or maybe 2 days, making a 2-3 hour drive to Springfield or St. Louis or Columbia, and all the additional costs that incurs, gas, eating out. So it makes it a lot more accessible where it's needed, because our office has over 400 active individuals that we support in 19 counties, and that's a lot of kiddos and young adults and adults with autism to support. And like Kelly said, a lot of times those families have challenges getting where they need to go. So having those 2 doctors here locally, there's also a doctor in Farmington now that can diagnose. It's just a crucially valuable resource that we have available now. So
Things are improving.
yes, they are. And if anybody needs, I brought a list of all the diagnostic facilities in Southeast Missouri, or not just Southeast Missouri, but the state. So if anybody wants a copy of that, they can take that with them.
I did post it in the Facebook event too.
Excellent.
I'll share it around.
Yeah.
Great.
Summer, can you talk a little bit about, from a parent perspective, what was your experience in getting services?
We noticed that Lucan was nonverbal at 2, and we have a really good relationship with our pediatrician. So he was like, well, I'm going to hook you up with a speech therapist. She's a friend of mine, but she takes Medicaid, and we'll let you see her for a couple of months. And then she sat me down one day and was like, Summer, you really need to get him evaluated. And I was like, I trust her. Okay. Dr. Lawrence had no problem making the appointment for me. Took a while. We went to the university and got Lucan diagnosed. His official diagnosis was PDD-NOS, which is, hold on, let me get it. Pervasive, what was it,
Pervasive developmental disorder.
Yeah, disorder, not otherwise specified, which basically means they have no idea what's going on, but he's on the spectrum.
Yeah.
He stayed nonverbal until he was 4. He got to 3-word sentences. But first it was speech therapy, and we were just on waiting list until he was 4 with speech therapy and nothing else. And then I can't remember if you remember her or not. Her name was Jennifer. She had red hair, and she was the one who did our first evaluation or ABA training at the Autism Center. I cannot. But it's been 6-7 years ago at least. We did some parent training there, and then we got on a waiting list for music therapy. That took another. Don't want to say, Kelly.
Takes a while.
There's
Not enough of us because we're not funded, but anyway.
I agree 1,000%. Let me just say this: that occupational therapy, early intervention and therapy has helped tremendously, but nothing has helped to the extent of music therapy. And I will say that to this day, because he is one awesome kid.
Is funding one of the biggest reasons that it takes so long
Yes.
for kids to get in there?
To get into music therapy, the demand is incredible. I've been around a long time, and I think that's good, and it's good. It's good in that there's kind of reputation for the program, and people know that it's a great program, so everybody gets on the list, which is great. It's all great news. It just is that it takes some time to get through because there's so many folks we need to see. So
Okay.
we have 2 music therapists in Cape Girardeau, and we have 2 music therapists in Poplar Bluff, and they travel to the West Plains office, the 2 in Poplar Bluff, on Thursdays. So tomorrow I'm going with them, so I'm going to West Plains tomorrow to watch therapy. I also supervise people in all these locations, so it gets a little interesting. But We also have an internship program. So we have 2 interns in our Cape Girardeau office, and we have an intern in Poplar Bluff, which also helps us to be able to serve more folks and also further the profession and train more folks and all of that. But, you know, Easter Seals has a contract with the state. Fortunately, music therapy is listed as one of the covered services in what used to be called the Autism Project. So that's why all of us have jobs. It's because it's specifically listed in the Code of State Regulations as one of the services that are provided. So anytime it's nebulous and it doesn't specifically list music therapy, it's up to someone's interpretation, which is not a good thing. You need it specifically listed, so it's just black and white. Here it is. So I will tell you that it is way more common to have music therapy services in a large city center. So there are a lot of music therapists in St. Louis, and Maryville University is there, so there's lots of folks leading that program. There's a lot of music therapists in Kansas City. UMKC has a music therapy program, and so does KU, University of Kansas, which is not that far away. So there's a lot of folks between Lawrence and UMKC. It's unusual to have music therapy in a rural area, which really speaks to the dedication of Easter Seals over all of these years, understanding the importance of what we do and how families aren't accessing these services anyplace else. And they have, for all of the years that I've been here, they've had music therapy, and even before me, there was a music therapist before me. So they understand the importance of that, and that other people aren't providing that service, and it's not being funded. So I can't say enough for Easter Seals for always understanding that that's important for people to still be able to access those services. At this point, there's still these shared unit funds that we can access those, but once that changes and once it's all purchase of service, it'll be interesting to see then what happens with music therapy services. So like I said, funding, it's always great when it exists. You can't ever rest on your laurels and think it's always going to be there. And it's so important to continue to educate everyone. This is why this is important. This is why these kids need it. And the second you aren't there to talk about it, to educate people, it'll go away. We had that same situation happen a few years ago with the Taylor Institute. All of a sudden, that money was just gone and people were surprised. Easter Seals is at the Capitol all of the time fighting for autism funding. And we're not the only people who are there fighting for autism funding. It's important. Families are there with us. Legislators want to hear from families way more than providers. The families really have the power. They're the people whose voice matters. So, and that's how it should be, because they're the folks who are in the trenches knowing what do we need. Our job at Easter Seals is to then say, okay, this is what the families are needing. How can we help make that happen? What can we do to help that?
And oh, sorry. You want to ask me?
No, you can go ahead. I was rounding out my thought.
I was just, so I don't know a ton about music therapy, and that might be the case for some folks here too. What is music therapy? What does that look like when you do with kids?
So it's really like the other therapies. It's like physical therapy or occupational therapy or speech language pathology. In that, there is an assessment conducted. There's treatment goals and objectives. There's you provide treatment, you evaluate the progress, and it's an ongoing plan of care. Why I think music therapy is so vitally important, particularly for individuals with autism spectrum disorders, is how music is processed in the brain. So if you are a music educator, your goal is to teach an instrument or teach someone how to sing. I have a degree in that too. That's separate. I'm not wearing that hat today. But I've been around a long time, Jennifer. That's all that's saying. And then a music therapist uses music for a non-musical goal. So I'm going to use music to teach someone how to make sounds, to teach someone how to speak, to teach someone how to exercise fine motor skills so they can then later button a button. So that's the difference. Music ed is to teach it for a musical purpose. I'm teaching it for a non-musical purpose. I'm using those skills to address different areas. I think the reason it's so important with individuals with autism, as I mentioned, it's a neurodevelopmental disorder. I have an additional area of specialization in neurologic music therapy, and that's how music is processed in the brain. When there are deficits or things are just different, we think that individuals with autism have a little bit over connectivity. About age 3, there's some pruning that happens, and then we don't have to process as much information. We do think through some of the research now that some of that pruning isn't happening with individuals with autism spectrum disorders. They're trying to process too much information at once, and they have significant sensory issues related to that. The reason music is really helpful is because it's processed in so many different areas of the brain. So if there are difficulties in one area because music is processed in so many areas of the brain, sometimes we can bypass the problems that are going on, and also music is organizing. So I'll give you a good example. You're gonna know something that nobody ever sat down and tried to teach you. So I think I've got the right age group here that you're gonna know this, I hope. So, not sure about Taylor, but we'll see. Maybe your parents raised you right, we'll see. So there was a song by Tommy Two-Tone, and there was a girl named Jenny, and she had a phone number. What was her phone number? Why do you know that?
Because we've heard the song over
Right?
and over.
Right? So did you ever sit down and try to learn that phone number? Have you thought about it in the last 20 years, 30 years?
No.
It's just in there, isn't
I
it?
still
That's
know
it.
it.
That's it, okay? So that's the I get a lot of credit for neurological processing. If you teach something to music, if you practice an instrument to music, it's different. And I'll tell you what we see a lot in the therapy room is I'll have kids who are having difficulty attending. And then all of a sudden I do it rhythmically on a drum and a different instrument. You have to, when I do this on this drum, you do this. When I do it on this drum, you do this. And all of a sudden we've got kids paying attention and following multiple step directions. And it's getting through to the brainstem, whereas other things don't get through to the brainstem for processing. I could go off on a brain tangent, but I won't. Anyway, it's important because of how music is processed in the brain. And we have a huge advantage getting in.
You can also teach kids to kind of do basic things that we don't think about, like get up in the morning, wash your face, and brush your teeth. But if you put that to music, it's easy for a kid to remember the steps in which they need to, do their morning routine.
And it's fun.
And I think that, with people who play musical instruments too, it's a lot about pattern organization.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's, there's that aspect of it too.
They're about,
I'm
yep.
a musician.
Yes, you get it. Yeah. It's the same thing. I used to work in a nursing home with individuals with Alzheimer's. And I had this beautiful lady who was a church organist. And you would see her in the hallway and she couldn't get out a sentence, but she'd kind of go ba-doop, 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 and she'd boop on down to the therapy room. She'd sit down at that piano and play any church hymn in 4-part harmony in any key until she had a stroke. Then she could only do it with one hand, so she'd do like 2-part harmony. But people are always like, oh, that's magic. How could she do that? She can't get out a sentence, but she can play things in 4-part harmony. Well, that's stored in the cerebellum. Everything that goes wrong with Alzheimer's is in the higher cortical areas. So if you understand brain structure, it makes perfect sense why she could still do that. It's in a different region of the brain. So. I'm sorry. I had to take my scarf off. I was getting excited.
Can I ask a quick question?
No, you're good.
I don't want to.
You're
I
good.
don't destroy your pattern here.
You're good.
In terms of the number of clinicians that you have, the number of music therapists that you have in this area,
Yes.
is that adequate? And what would you need in terms of numbers of people that would have the training in order to reach out to this community?
Well, we need more music therapists for certain. I think that Easter Seals does a masterful job of managing their budget and figuring out we have to have autism specialists. We have to have funding to send these people to the home for families who don't have transportation. So we get a certain chunk of money from the state every year. It goes to the Parent Advisory Committee, and then they decide where all that's going to go. And they've got a very difficult job too, because these are all the needs of this community. So it all honestly comes down to funding. If the funding exists, we'll have it. And so we had 3 music therapists in Cape Girardeau a few years back. And our funding got reduced, which, sometimes the governor withholds certain funds at certain times of the year, sometimes it gets reinstated. When one of those things happened, we lost a music therapist. And that was a position, sometimes the positions are hard to fill because there's more jobs than we can fill because there's huge demand for it. And what I hated about that is it took me a year. The position was open for a year. I got an intern, I trained that intern. She finished her program, she went back to UMKC, got her master's degree, and the job was still open, and she came back and we hired her. And that's the one that I lost. And took you know, so that's the frustrating part of it. And it's honestly not anybody's fault. If you think about it, there's so many needs, there's so many different diagnoses. Easter Seals is doing their best with the money that they get. It all comes down to funding. You know, it comes down to funding.
In a perfect world, though, how many would you want?
Oh. Well,
I got a question. What are
yes.
the different services for kids with autism?
Oh, baby, there are multiple. Thank you.
Yeah, we can definitely talk about that
We will.
before we leave tonight. Yeah, that's a good question.
Very
So are you, for these 19 counties you're thinking, or for what area?
Well, in a perfect world, I mean, how many would you need? I guess, yeah, to service the 19 counties, the Easter Seals Midwest.
It would be nice if I didn't have to drive into West Plains every now and then.
Or Claire.
Well, to be honest with you, if you wanna talk about it, when I first started, it was me. And so like, I drove to West Plains and I did assessments one day a year. And I provided recommendations for other people to implement. It wasn't music therapy, but it was some ideas. Here are some things you can do.
Just say Tom Steyer decided to fund Easter Seals all the way around tomorrow. 15, 20?
Wow. You just blew my mind.
I'm
Summer.
sorry.
So how would it, I mean, if we could have
the current list that I have and all of that, I could easily keep 4 music therapists in Cape busy, 4 music therapists in Poplar Bluff busy, and a couple music therapists in West Plains busy, easily.
so 10.
Just our services. You had a question earlier, I'm sorry.
Yeah, like the music therapy is very helpful to not only stroke victims that have damage in the vocal region of the brain, as well as all people that suffer from Alzheimer's and people on the autism spectrum disorder also respond very well to music therapy. Are they getting any closer to a correlation between these 3 things to figure out what's going on in the brain? Because I want to talk more about the brain.
You know, actually the MRI technology has helped tremendously. We know so much more. And you talk about individuals like with strokes. I went to college a really long time ago. And so when I was in graduate school, they talked about, we did something called melodic intonation therapy, something that speech language pathologists do as well as music therapists. And what our thought was, hey, like we know that the speech center is damaged in this individual, so let's use the music center, let's teach them to sing, and let's fade out the music and then they'll speak, but then when you're done, they're speaking through the music center of the brain, not the speech center of the brain, which is the opposite hemisphere. So we knew that worked, but we did not know until the MRI technology caught up that there are now new neural connections. From the music center of the brain, it goes through the corpus callosum and goes into the left hemisphere of the brain to the speech center, and there's new neural connections. Your brain is amazing what can happen. So we're only kind of scratching the surface of what we know, but there's certainly areas of the brain that the only thing that we know that activates it is music. We're not saying that is the only thing, but the only thing they've found as of now that activates that region is music. So girl, we need another 3 hours.
There's an autism conference once a year, and they do an afternoon
Autism
thing on
doesn't seem to
music
affect
therapy.
the music centers like it does the speech centers of the brain. So there's great hope for
Yes,
some
and the
quick
speech
breakthroughs
issues,
there.
I honestly think many of the speech issues in individuals with autism spectrum disorders are motor planning issues. And once you get the motor planning, and that's why it's important to have speech paths and OTs involved. Once you get the motor planning straightened out, you get the motor plan set, then sometimes we can get speech later than you would with someone else with a different developmental disability. That's why I think autism is so surprising. Kids are talking, all of a sudden starting to talk at 4, 5, 9, 10. Like, that's kind of unheard of. If you would look at another developmental disability, that's unusual. But it's probably because it's motor planning when you get a motor plan set, which is in the cerebellum.
People with autism spectrum disorder also have a great deal of problems with the motor coordination and development area, and that a lot of those connections are starting to make about the time they walk at 1, where a lot of people are also diagnosed or start to show manifest their symptoms of autism about the same time
Yeah,
and then regress.
yes. You're very knowledgeable as well.
Well, you know,
Right?
this discussion, like a lot of discussions that involve healthcare, you know, they make it so difficult to get services. You know, that's one of the things that I think that where we're really missing the boat, is that it gets more and more complicated. And, you know, with every change in what we're gonna pay for and what we're not, you know, we're losing things. And I think so, you know, in this kind of a situation, if you can get all hands on deck from the early point in that child's life, we know that the success rate is gonna be extremely high.
Yes,
And so, you know, we can't wait with this.
yes.
You know, this is as serious as a heart attack in a lot of ways, and so we can't wait with it. And so, you know, one of the things that is a value that I have is how do we then, with all of our healthcare, make it so that it's easily accessed and that it covers the things that we are suffering from. You know, that's the challenge. And I think that the more that we tinker with it and make it more complicated, the more people that we lose one way or the other. So, you know, I really like the way that both of you are presenting this, or all of you are presenting this, because it really gives me a whole idea of how it might look different.
Right.
Right, early intervention really is the key, and like you said, you know, with this being a healthcare issue, and you know, culturally, we're starting to understand that mental health is just as, if not more important than physical health, because they really are intertwined. You know, the average family of a child with autism, that's gonna cost anywhere between $17,000, $18,000 to $21,000, $22,000 more to raise a child with autism than it is a quote-unquote neurotypical child. And if you have kids, you know that it's already extremely expensive to raise a child in this day and age. So early intervention and, you know, having funding for that intervention. Kelly mentioned shared unit funding, and what that refers to is the Autism Project, which was started, back in 2011? 2001, 2008. I was brushing up on my dates today, and there's too many of them.
I feel like that's back to '99.
So it's been around for a while, and like Kelly said, we get a chunk of money from the state every year. Every year we have to fight for that money. Right now we just started a campaign to give out kudos cards to our families and individuals and stakeholders, to write to legislators about, you know, why autism funding means so much to you, how has it changed your family, how has it impacted your life. We do go to the Capitol usually every spring for the autism rally, but just last year, you know, we thought for several weeks that we were going to lose 30% of our funding.
It was like 40%.
30 to 40%. We were going to have to, like, looking at who are we going to get rid of,
Yeah.
which equals, because we get that pot of money, that's how we pay our staff and keep the lights on so that we can go out and do what we need to do and families don't have to pay anything. So when we talk about losing that money, we talk about losing staff, which means, you know, we talk about, you know, 40, 50 less people getting services each month.
Well, and I think a 40% cut, that would have,
It would have
we probably wouldn't
devastated
have
our
had a
office.
building. I'm pretty sure you lose a building at that
Yeah,
point.
it would have devastated our office.
No, it would have been
40%
10 by
is-
10 in the parking
Yeah.
lot.
So
I'll be shaking them around in the
and
parking lot.
doing so at a time when we just continue to get a higher number of referrals. Like, I was just looking today, I've been in this position for almost 4 years. Back when I first started, the number of referrals we were getting a month, a year, has almost doubled 4 years later. You know, and that's just that Autism Project funding. We do also provide services through private insurance, which that's helped us tremendously, and that covers services for what's called applied behavioral analysis, or ABA, which is recognized as one of the most effective therapies for individuals on the spectrum. And if you don't have Medicaid, or if you're not lucky if your private insurance doesn't cover ABA or doesn't cover it at a rate that's affordable. In Missouri a few years ago, I think this is what I'm thinking about, in 2011, there's an autism mandate for private insurance. Any insurance policy underwritten in the state of Missouri, whether it's a small business, large business, has to cover autism, has to cover ABA or autism services. A lot of businesses get around that by having their insurance underwritten in other states. There's several companies in Southeast Missouri who seems like they've gone out of their way to not have insurance policies that cover that. I'm not going to name any names.
I'd love a list
But
of
I've
those.
I've been very surprised when I've run insurance checks for families that these large companies don't cover ABA.
So they're
There's a large
purposely-
hospital system in Southeast Missouri that doesn't cover ABA. And that surprised me as well. And hopefully that's going to be changing in the next few years, where all insurance, no matter where it's underwritten, has to cover autism services. Medicaid takes on a huge cost to cover that at 100%, and families are very, very lucky, because these are families who otherwise would not be able to have that service. It's very expensive to provide ABA, and so having said that, it's really hard for us as an agency to provide that through our state funding, because so much of our money goes to traveling to homes and setting up social groups in Caruthersville, or setting up an employment group in Perryville. A lot of our specialists rack up thousands of miles every month. It's a huge expense that we incur monthly, but it's really important, and that's why we're one of the very few providers that are able to do that and continue to do that, because it's so important to us, that service delivery model.
How will you be impacted by Medicaid expansion?
I don't know that much about Medicaid expansion, I'm gonna be honest with you. One thing that I can tell you is that, like Kelly said, there will come a point in time when the Autism Project moves from just, a bucket of money at the beginning of the fiscal year, so to speak, to a point of service like waiver. We used to be able to provide music therapy under Medicaid waiver a couple of years ago, and that's why we lost.
It changes from.
And it changes depending
I've
on
been here when it
who's.
was funded, when it wasn't funded, when it wasn't
Right.
funded, when it was.
So maybe in the near future it'll be funded again, but that's difficult when you're a service provider and your family. Depending on that, you have music therapy one day and then you don't have it the next day, because the state has changed its mind on the service definition.
So this is where a federal mandate would really serve a purpose, so the state would have to adhere, if we had a federal law that said that state funding has to make up for ABA or whatever.
Right.
Because otherwise you're just gonna have the hunger games.
Right.
I mean, it's like.
Right.
Exactly. That's a really good analogy.
We know that the current administration in Missouri has a habit of writing out certain services out of the budget every year, so.
Yeah, we definitely have to fight tooth and nail for every penny that we get, and it's a fight it's a fight every year.
And how much, time and energy and wear and tear on the clinicians and the, providers,
It's
I mean,
stressful.
and the families, it's insane.
It's really stressful.
What happens if someone comes in for services and they don't have insurance?
So that's a really good question. So if you have an autism diagnosis, and you meet Department of Mental Health eligibility requirements, you are automatically eligible to receive Autism Project funding. It's also called shared unit or PAC funding, because the Parent Advisory Committee allocates, a portion to each agency in Southeast Missouri, and that's our office, SEMO and Blue Sky, which provides employment services for adults. So if you have an autism diagnosis from a recognized provider or diagnostic facility, and you pass the assessment that that they administer, you know, do you meet their level of support needed, then you receive these funds, and for the most part, you'll have those as long as you live in the region.
Do you have to go through the Catholic Charities or the Regional Center or something like that though to receive the funding?
So yeah, once you have that diagnosis, your next step, if you don't want to pay through insurance, which I wouldn't want to, so, and I always recommend it to families. Most families don't bat an eyelash at that. So would be to call either the Sykeston Regional Office or the Poplar Bluff Regional Office, depending on which side of the region you live on. Over here, you call Sykeston, obviously. They send you out a big packet of paperwork. It's your responsibility to fill it out and complete. They send someone out to your house to assess your child or your young adult. And if you meet that criteria, then they put you in touch with Catholic Charities of Southern Missouri and Scott County. It's the same in Cave County, and each area has some counties have their own targeted case management agencies. Some agencies cover multiple counties. You know, and that's something that the regional office can help you with if you're calling them for the first time. And then it's their job to inform you of who your local providers are. So if you have parent of a newly diagnosed child, you know, these are your options: Easter Seals, SEMO, Blue Sky. These are the services they can provide. We spend a lot of time every year, or I spend a lot of time every year, going to each TCM, educating them about our services, maintaining and trying to improve those relationships with them, because it's really important that we work well together for those families and those individuals to make sure they're getting what they need. So, and they coordinate those services for them. So they're an important piece of the puzzle as well, in understanding our funding, being able to refer families, as far as that goes, you know, they can help provide other resources as well, that we can't provide, you know, and the insurance part of it, you know, that's a long waiting list also for our office, but families, all they have to do is call me, and if they have an autism diagnosis, we can check their benefits for them, if they're not sure what they are, and it's really mostly a waiting game. And you know, a lot of times families though will have autism coverage under their policy, but they can't afford it because their deductible is $5,000. You know, and they have to meet that before, you know, any benefits will kick in. So
What happens with adults once they age out to 18? Do they still get the regional center to help them, or do they have to, you know? Because I know you guys do a lot for the older kids now, and it used to not be that way.
Right, so Easter Seals provides services across the lifespan. We have an individual who's in his mid-50s who's bouncing in and out.
Oh, he's upper 40s.
Is he 49?
He's a
I think he turned 49 recently, didn't he?
He's younger than me.
48, 49, anyway. So, but we do have individuals in their 40s, and I know that there's one individual in his 50s. I think he maybe lives out closer to Poplar Bluff.
Yeah.
But the state funding is not affected by age. What is affected is coverage for private insurance and Medicaid. At a certain point, and you know, people need to check their insurance policies and be familiar with those. If you're an individual, I can think of one young man who's 19, he's still on his parents' policy, he is in college. You know, it depends on your policy. Some policies will cover up to age 26, depending on the circumstances in the policy. But after age 18, and for a large part of it, you would have to access, if you're not going to do, because insurance won't cover over 18, except in specific cases. For the large part of it, individuals have to go through what's called a Medicaid waiver to access ABA in particular. You can still get other shared unit services like parent training, social group, music therapy. But if you're wanting ABA, for example, our behavior analyst, Jessica Harrison, supports 3 individuals at a day program in Perryville. And all of those individuals have to act. One of them has an autism diagnosis, 2 of them do not. But all 3 of them have to access ABA therapy through the waiver because of their age. So it really just depends on the age and the insurance situation. And I have a matrix that talks about all of that I created, but I didn't bring that with me. So
Figure all that out.
I have a question. Do you work in any way with the federally qualified health centers and community health centers throughout the area? Do they have physicians there that are qualified to make a diagnosis?
So the only physicians I know of in the area that are qualified to make a diagnosis would be Dr. Dahlbeck at the Ferguson Medical Group in Sykeston, and Claudia Prushoff at Poplar Bluff Pediatrics. That's not to say there aren't other ones, but those are the ones we see most often, and we are getting a lot more of them because those 2 doctors have partnered with that Echo Autism program. We do need more that can provide that diagnosis. There's a lot of doctors that know enough to make a referral.
Because I know, you know, I'm vice chair of the Board of the Community Health Center in Jefferson County. And one of the things that we're looking at is making that comprehensive. And it seems like to me that could be a potential resource if people are trained to, if the physicians are trained to at least do that initial diagnosis. We already have the sites throughout the whole district, throughout the whole state.
Right.
So, you know, that looks at, with some expansion with that, it looks like that might be another option to provide more treatment services.
And that's totally right. And with that Echo Autism program, that's all done through, that's all done online. It's like because it's kind of like, it's telehealth. It's the step before that, and that's the next step to that is providing parent training through telehealth. That way, that eliminates the need for travel altogether.
Yes.
You know, and that's a big direction that Easter Seals is hoping to go in the near future, both through our state funding and through our insurance funding. Those are things that we're looking at very strongly. And being able to reach more people and obviously cut our costs as well, which allows us to reach more people because we can hire more people. You know,
Yeah, we have a pediatric psychiatrist that does telemedicine, and it's extremely effective just
Right.
in terms of reaching so many people.
so I think that's a big key, and then for local pediatricians and primary care providers to be able to access the Echo Autism and join a cohort and receive the training to diagnose and have the benefit of consulting with this interdisciplinary team to treat the whole individual. It just would be to represent just such a huge leap forward for you know, rural areas and being able to access healthcare.
Yeah, and I've been envisioned, you know, with the idea of making it easier, you know, is that we have a van that could go to people, and you know, and we're going to be in town, and you know, and we're going to do some assessments and on whatever it is. I mean, I think we have because of the isolation in rural areas, it's so hard, and it's very costly to travel.
It is. It really is. It really, really is.
Is there federal funding for autism care?
$1.8 billion sitting there someplace.
I mean, you know, the Autism Cares Act that was just reauthorized not too long ago, that does put more money towards research, grants for agencies like Easter Seals, like, I mean, there's all kinds, there's a ton of agencies in the Springfield area compared to here. You know, smaller groups that may not have the benefit of receiving state funding even, if you wanna call that a benefit. Sometimes I'm not sure that it is. They do, I mean, we do what we can with what we have, and we're grateful for that, very much so.
Well, you guys split your money between 5 different places in the state. I mean, you don't get any federal funds.
to Easter Seals.
Is it pass-through money?
I'm not sure how that works. Rachel Masters would be the one to answer that question.
That's really a great question.
Yeah.
I know that there have been federal monies that affect the state money. In the end, the money comes specifically from the state. If any of that, I think that's all revenue from the state. I don't think any of that comes.
That's all.
Yeah, and the question is why is that not from the states? Because usually that's one of the purposes of it, isn't it supposed to come to the states?
And maybe it doesn't, we don't know, but
Well, it's, when you think about 1.8 billion, it's not a lot of money.
No, that's
But it
a
really
lot spread out.
it sounds like a lot, but it's not.
But it's not nearly enough, to address the need. But it's like, my question that I always have, for anybody that's a legislator is, show me the money. Where is it coming from? If this much money has been allocated, where is it?
Yeah.
Right.
Because one of the things that happened when we got the cigarette money, when they had all of the lawsuits and they passed a lot of money to the states, well, that came to Missouri and nobody seems to know who got that. So it could be sitting there in a pot someplace, or it could have been spent for something that it was not authorized to be spent for. We've got about, I think, $380 million that's coming to the state of Missouri for opioid addiction and addiction care. Now, what we want to do is keep our eye on that money, because it tends to be siphoned off into a whole bunch of things and loses the effectiveness of being that. Now, for addiction, that's also a very small amount of money. But the reality of it is, it's something that we can do something with to save some lives. So we have to keep on our legislature, where's the money going? When we get this money, how are we gonna know, because there should be a panel that's gonna be deciding where it goes, like we're talking about the parents that decide. We should have our fair share of that in this district, So, ask those hard questions and make them come up with the answers,
I know that I want to say the last couple years budget, that Missouri rejected some federal money. I don't know if that is some of the federal money that the state rejected, but I want to say Medicaid money was part of it, because for our centers, they stopped reimbursing us for Medicaid, so that I wouldn't be surprised if some of that money they're just turning away. I don't know why they would ever do that. Yeah, it makes no sense as to why they would do that. But I don't know if it's for political capital or what, so.
And that's what's the sad thing is like, I have to be careful what I say. These are children's lives that we're talking about, and early intervention, a sound diagnosis and early intervention can make, I can't even think of the right superlative or hyperbole to use, but just a literal world of difference in the outcome of that child's life, and it impacts the family's outcome as well, because it's very stressful on marriages, on siblings, on extended family who are providing support for the parents, or a lot of times a single parent, because one parent's working all the time, because one parent has to stay home, because it's almost impossible to find childcare that's able or willing to care for that child outside of the school setting, sometimes even in the school setting, because a lot of schools in this area and all over the state and all over the country, I would imagine, aren't as educated in how to support individuals with autism as they could be.
Well, even if they go to school for special education, me and Kelly have talked about this before. When she was in school, well, you tell it better than I do. You barely had one chapter on autism, and y'all just breezed right through it.
Oh yeah, I have a master's in special education also, and we did not spend a lot of time talking about it. We spent an enormous amount of time talking about ADHD.
Yes.
That was my professor's. That was her milieu. That was her area of expertise. She wrote all of her research articles about ADHD. But I remember maybe like a week was spent on autism, maybe a chapter or two.
And this, there's a while ago, but like this is like the 90s, you know.
Yeah.
You were probably when you were in grad school.
I graduated grad school in the early 2000s.
Oh, stop.
Which is still a really long time ago.
So I was in the 90s, and we didn't talk about it much. So, like
But
a day.
what I was going to say is that, you know, things like that, the outcome of a child's life shouldn't be a political issue.
Exactly.
You know,
That's right.
and when we talk about is it worth the things that we do fund and giving those kinds of things priority over, you know, services for children and families that can make just a lifetime of difference for that individual versus like, you know, them being able to go out. It could literally be the difference between them going out and being able to maintain competitive employment or live independently, or it could be as serious as the difference between them talking or not talking
Yes.
because they didn't receive the intervention early enough or couldn't access it even though they, you know, had the funding for it.
Yes.
So
And, you know, the reality of it is, the sad reality is that, you know, for a country with the great wealth that we have, we don't take very good care of our people.
We don't take very good care of our resources. If you catch a child under 3 and get this early intervention going, you're going to have a person that's going to be a lot less impact on resources through the rest of their
Absolutely.
life.
Right, yeah.
I mean,
That's a
it's
good
just
And
it's
same
just
thing with the
pretty foolish.
mental
They
health
try to-
issue,
yeah.
you know? Same
See, I
thing.
was thinking about that earlier when you talked about Medicaid funding and things. I know a lot of parents who have filed for disability for their children because they didn't have any other way to get insurance for that child.
Right. Yeah.
It's just a human dignity too. You know, if you can get somebody that's more self-sufficient and self-reliant, it just increases the dignity.
Yes.
That people know they got to spend a little money in
Yes.
the beginning and catch them quick,
Absolutely.
and not put people on waiting list after waiting list when the most critical
Yeah.
36 months are going by.
Yes.
You know,
Absolutely.
one of the things that I've spent my career working with people, you know, in working to help them empower themselves. And when they can empower themselves, then they can take that out into the world in a different way. And so, you know, we have so many opportunities that we keep missing to make great change. And it's gonna take money. But at the end of the day, we will be a different state, we will be a different region, we will be a different country for doing it. For doing
I
the right
did
thing.
think of some federal funding we access. First Steps, that's federally funded,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So IDA Part C, the First Steps program, we do provide some of that. That's federal funding that we access.
Is that through the public schools?
Part
Money funneled through the Department
No,
of Education?
IDA Part B is public schools, ages 3 to 21. IDA Part C is First Step 0 to 3. In Missouri, it's called First Steps. Different states call it different things. But that's federal funding because the state has to submit materials to the federal government every year to make sure that they're compliant. And Missouri's First Steps program has some of the most stringent guidelines and is a very successful program.
Good.
You have to have a greater than a 50% delay to access those services, and Missouri has a great history of being a great provider in that area.
I'm glad Missouri's doing something right.
They need to add music therapy.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
I will say that a number of families, especially, and I didn't know this when I started in this position, Missouri is lucky in that not every state has, you know, an autism project where
Yes.
it's a line item in the state budget and families are able to access services at no cost to them. You know, we've had families move to Missouri from Louisiana, from California, from Florida, from all over the country have moved here because they can't get autism services for free where they live. Which, you know, and that's why I say we are very grateful for the funding that we do receive. It means the world to us. You know, I think I speak for everyone that works at Easter Seals when I say that we live and breathe autism, not just from 8 to 5, but like at night we go home and we think about these families and these individuals and what can I do differently tomorrow? How can I help that parent? I remember the first time I asked a parent, well, how can we help you? What do you need? And she started crying because she said, no one's ever asked me what I need or how I can be supported. Because it's not just the individual that we're treating the whole family at Easter Seals. because the parents need confidence to raise their child. They need those skills to communicate not only with their child but with their other children and with their spouse or significant other. They need our support for school, you know, and when the parent has that confidence and knows that, you know, we have their back, that makes a big difference for their ability as a parent and their self-worth also, and which, you know, in turn rubs off on the child and just the entire family. So, you know, it's important to us that we have that relationship with the whole family. And
Well, sometimes with respite, you guys just give us an hour break to give us an hour break.
right, you know, because sometimes an hour break, you know, can feel like a week or more. And we haven't had one in a long time. So, right. So if you just need to go take a nap in your car for an hour, you know, like, go for it. So yeah, those things are really important to us, and that's why we all just work very hard and continue to do what we do despite, you know, the challenges that we face. And that's why I would say that we're all very good problem solvers. You
Yes.
know, you
That's
have
what
to
we
be,
do all day long.
and you have to be
Yeah.
creative, and you have to stay upbeat, you know, because we have to be there for these families. So, yeah.
I'm gonna ask you all the question that Kathy posed earlier, and Summer, I'm gonna ask you too. So if you could create no funding, whatever funding you needed,
See,
whatever.
we're writing policies now.
So our plan with these forums, so maybe you all don't know this, but we're hosting a series of these forums across the district. So we've organized 15 of them over, you know, some last month, this month, and a few next month as well. We're gonna keep doing these, a wide range of topics: childcare, autism care. We did LGBTQ rights last night. There's multiple goals with these. Summer said she wanted to host on this topic, and this was important to us specifically because it's not something I know a ton about. And so we're thinking through, you know, hopefully Kathy is the next congresswoman from the 8th district. That's what we're working towards. And so when she's elected, day one, what are the type of policies that we need to be working to implement? So in a dream world, what type of federal policy would you all like to see?
Federally, I would love for them to have federal licensure of music therapists, so we wouldn't have to go state by state, but we already tried that.
What a marvelous idea.
We tried that, and we're board certified. So we said, just recognize our board certification. It's already like a CPA exam, or an additional exam.
Yeah, I got one of those too.
Yeah,
They
they would-
recognize it.
They wouldn't use that. They want the states to have independence and make their decisions, and so we're going state by state to do that. So that would be amazing. Huge bucket of autism funding that you know that gets where it needs to be.
And it
Gets
covers,
to
and it
families.
covers, you know, all the way to the people that are older that need also services.
That is also a huge issue.
It's
It is.
yeah, I mean,
Yes.
there's just really nothing, you know, that is available.
Yes. It's getting better, but that's been a huge issue. People get concerned when the kids turn 18. What are we doing
Yeah.
next?
And that's a huge area of focus for not only Easter Seals, but on the federal level as well. They've recognized that there's a huge lack of resources and funding, services for the transition to adulthood. It's an area that wasn't focused on very heavily in the past because the expectations and outcomes weren't what they are now for individuals to be able to go out and live independently or semi-independently, or, you know, to be able to work and access their community. But apparently we've been doing something right, because now there's a multitude of individuals, not only with autism, but all sorts of developmental disabilities, that are more than capable of working competitively, and living some independently or somewhat independently. That being said, 90% of individuals with autism are unemployed in this country of working age, which is a huge number. And that's a lot to do with lack of understanding and education in the community at large. Business owners not wanting to take on the challenge of supporting someone, even though there are services through places such as MERS Goodwill that provide job coaching and job shadowing. Easter Seals does that also. And You'd be amazed. We have a volunteer program through our pre-employment program at Easter Seals, and you'd be amazed at how many small businesses in the Cape community have turned down our transition coordinator for volunteer positions for individuals. It's really disheartening. So,
Do they get are there any tax incentives for taking someone on?
not that I know of,
But there could be.
but there could be. We could make that a thing. Then we can make that a thing. We could definitely make that a thing. You know, and also, you know, more education for families, understanding, you know,
And communities.
in communities, how, you know, what can an individual do? What are their rights in the workplace? How much, a lot of families are concerned with, oh, well, the reality of the fact is that a lot of families use the disability income or to supplement for bills or groceries. So they become dependent on that money, not necessarily because it was a conscious choice that they made, but it's just the reality of the matter in a lot of cases. So not knowing or being scared of that individual losing that income, because that income, you know, whether or not that individual lives at home or moves out, can be a safety net for them. So no, understanding how much you can work, how much you can earn, how to manage your money, and having more education programs for that, because that's something that even we at Easter Seals need to learn more about, because it's a very gray area that, like a lot of state policies or federal policies, changes, and there's not a lot of fanfare about it.
Right.
You know, you have to dig for that information on your own. So being able, you know, to fund more education for families, to know, you know, what the individual, how much they can and can't work, you know, where should they put their money in a special needs trust, you know, or how much can they put in their savings account, you know, because hiring a financial it sounds all well and good to go hire a financial planner to help you do this, but not all families can afford to do that. So how can we give families those resources to make sure that their individual's taken care of? Because the fact of the reality is they're not always going to be there. You know, and that individual knowing that they're taken care of, you know, is a huge peace of mind, because we know that individuals that live in supported living or other residential places like that are a huge risk for all kinds of, you know, abuse, physical, financial, sexual abuse, and, you know, that goes unreported or not believed. So knowing that that individual is going to be taken care of, and understanding the finances behind that is very important. So having money for that, I think, is really important.
Well,
Also.
and then if you look on the county level, you know, the public administrator can usually take over if there's no one else that will, you know,
Right.
the one that the oversight piece, but that's always challenging because there are so many people that they have to,
Right.
you know, so there has to be a way that position could be increased just to make sure that everything is the way
Having the
it's
funding for that position and be able to handle the needs of that, that's a really good point.
What about community sheltered workshops? Are they still around?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's VIP in Cape County. Perry County has, a life enrichment. Is that a sheltered workshop or is that just a day program?
I'm not sure.
There's several workshops operating in the area still, but we know that those individuals are paid well below minimum wage. They're not being compensated for the work they're doing. We know that businesses are getting out of hiring their own employees by passing on these menial tasks to these individuals who in many cases could be working competitively.
Yeah.
Although I've never worked with a community shelter workshop, but what I've seen inside of them, they're people that just aren't employable, but they give them jobs and simple tasks. So they do get some employment. I mean, yeah, maybe they're paying them under wage, but there's some dignity in feeling productive.
I would say that it probably depends on the sheltered workshop. I've lived in several places in the state of Missouri. I'm from Jackson originally, but I worked in this field when I lived in Columbia. I've seen it in, you know, I've seen a couple places in St. Louis before. I think it just depends on who's running it.
Who can use.
Yeah, and where it's at. But, you know, you could. It's like with anything else. You could do a really, really exemplary job, or you could just, you know, be doing the bare minimum. And it's also in how well you're able to train your employees that work there. So.
I do want to say that there are a couple of awesome young adults in Cape who are working at certain different places. I think there's one that works at Sam's and one that works at Pugley's. Anyway, without getting too in the weeds on their personal business, that someone from Blue Sky goes and helps them learn the job, and then as time goes on, they spend less and less time up there, and they do their own work. And I mean, they're very, very good workers. They're good kids. I mean, just put it that way. They're kids. They're good kids, and they do their job well. And it just sometimes they just need that, you know, beginning thing to get over that hurdle. And going back to your question, in a perfect world, I would want the education department to make it mandatory that all special education teachers take at least a semester on autism.
Amen. That's a good one.
That's really
good one, Summer.
Thank you.
That's a good one.
Write it down. If you think of
That's
more, you can myself on the
excellent.
That is excellent.
Yeah, I was gonna say, without saying where this is at, I know that there are some programs that they kind of treat special education like it's a luxury as far as like who they will bring in. They will say, oh, you know, a certification's enough, or like, you know, and these are people responsible for the education and the lives of these students with autism.
2 years ago, my special education teacher for Lucan entire year was a girl who had just graduated from SEMO the year before and had never taught a class before in her life.
Yeah.
That's pretty common in Southeast Missouri too, because when so Zach is an educator, like he works, I mean, with schools in the area, but I know growing up in the Boot Hill, like there were a lot of, even in our school, there were a lot of folks who had certifications or certificates, not even degrees, and that were in positions, and because of the need, I guess, and then the lack of funding to pay teachers and especially special educators. I know that in our high school, we had 200 people total K through 12, and the guy that was a special ed teacher was our bus driver.
Yeah.
That I don't know what, and I would assume probably had no bachelor's. So
Appropriate salaries for special educators so we can attract the best.
Yeah, because that's what I encounter where I'm at, is that there is a total lack. And not that these people don't care, because they care. They care about the students they work
Right.
with. But there is a sense of like, you know, I'm going to do.
I don't
Well, I
have to
think they
really
need-
educate these kids. I'm just really here to watch them.
Right, and
Yeah.
there is a sense of that, and that idea that like we're not incentivized to do better outside of just getting from point A to point B, like, you know, and I think that there is a lack, and it kind of goes down to the funding too. Like, we know these rates are increasing and we are learning more. Why are we choosing to pull back funding when we know there are more and more people who are being diagnosed and we're learning more and more? Why are we making this conscious choice? Because it's a choice. You're choosing where you're going to put your funding, and this is one area where you think you can cut back, and I don't understand it. I don't understand
Keep
it.
the football team going.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
yes.
Exactly. That's
That happens at a lot of schools. Is that the sports program takes priority over education, and you know that kid's probably not going to go to the pros.
right.
I don't think so.
I know their parents are going to be so disappointed.
So speaking to what you're saying, something that Easter Seals feels really strongly about and is being able to provide support for schools. A lot of times that decision's not up to the teacher that actually needs that support. That decision's made, usually made more by an administrator or the special education supervisor.
That's why I said went
Some
straight to the
schools in
Department
the
of
area
Education.
are very supportive and very eager to have us come in. And we work really hard to maintain those relationships, and we're always trying to establishing new ones. But we can provide, observations for, individuals who, their behaviors are challenging. You want to know how to support them. Helps make you a better teacher, better educator. Makes the classroom a better place for everyone. And we can provide training to, once we do that observation, we can provide training. In some cases we can do that for free. Depends on the situation. In other cases, the school may need to set up a private pay contract with us. If it's something as simple as, hey, I've got this individual, I can't get them to stay in their seat during nap time. They're walking around talking to themselves, or they're scooting around the classroom in their chair, or they're, there's all kinds of things they could be doing. Can you come and do an observation? Yes. And then we provide recommendations, and we can do a follow-up for that. But again, a lot of times we have to get the school to agree, and certain schools are very willing. Other school districts are not. And that's a challenge that we have, like, across the district, and you'd be surprised at what schools are really have opened their doors, and you'd probably be also surprised at what schools are not willing to do so.
A lot of times smaller schools are more willing to accept assistance because
They need it.
They need it.
Yeah.
But not all small
It's
schools.
not all small schools.
Not all,
but
yeah.
Not all
There are
small
some I would imagine that are kind of like, we want to leave it alone with what we're doing, and
So-
there's
Basically, yes.
And that's
Yeah,
also
or
something
our
that-
funding goes towards this, and we can't see in an IEP or an individual assessment you do once a year if your child's been diagnosed. They can't tell you that they can't afford certain things, but they have learned this awesome way of going so far around the mulberry bush that by the end of the conversation, you don't know what you agreed to. And you can actually have one of these guys go with you to an IEP.
We can do that.
Do you guys have anything to do with a para at school? Someone who walks around with the student all day?
We can train the para.
But, I mean, you can't help with the funding or for the school district.
I mean, that's on the school district,
district,
yeah,
completely.
or the family. Some families will pay for their own personal assistant to come with the child to school. That has to be navigated with the individual school district, but I have seen that done before, especially if this child's in a parochial school, Lutheran or Catholic school or whatever, who aren't federally obligated to provide special education services. But what I will say is that we can provide training for any para, if that individual has our services already. And we can provide training, long-term also. We just have to look at that on a situational basis. We do have a situation right now in a early childhood program where we're gonna be training their staff extensively with an individual that we work with. So, and that's gonna be through state funding. So it can happen, it's situational, as are a lot of these issues. I have to be careful about what I say. With the IEP meeting, school can't tell a parent that they can't bring an advocate with them, which is what we can serve in a role as. There are resources for parents. There's on Desi's website, and I have a copy of it, that there's a parent's guide to special education in Missouri that outlines what your rights are in a very easy to understand way, because a lot of times parents will get those procedural safeguards in the mail right on time, within that, is it 20 days? 20-day time limit. It's in legalese. It's a lot, not many families have the time to read that or understand what all the ramifications are. So, having someone else there to support the parent, and then that also gets our foot in the door. Helps us start building a relationship with the teacher or the administrator, who might be the LEA, which is really important. And, for families to understand also how, with a child with an IEP, that discipline within the school looks a lot different than what schools are able to do for a child that's not receiving special education services. So a lot of times schools will call a parent and be like, hey, little Johnny's at it again, we need you to come pick him up. Oh, I'm at work, I can't do that. Okay, well, we'll just call the juvenile office, or we'll call the children's division to come pick them up. Well, what parent's not gonna like immediately drop what they're doing and run to that school at the threat of that?
Your job or your child is basically
So
what
that
they
being
did
said, that's at that point it's considered, and I won't go way into the weeds here, but at that point that's considered an out of school suspension. It's not like you're going to a doctor's appointment. You're not voluntarily picking them up. The school's not giving you a choice.
Right.
When that happens and a certain number of these occurrences add up to 7 days, 70 hours of instructional time, that constitutes a change of placement within the IEP, which you have to have an IEP meeting for. So they've now violated, if it gets to that point where it's equals 70 hours, they've now violated federal law, and there has to be a very specific procedure that takes place at that point. And that includes bus suspensions as well, if the child receives bus services through their IEP. So, and the parents don't know this. So these are things that we feel very importantly to educate families about, and that we feel like schools need more support in developing behavior intervention plans before it gets to that point. Because I feel, and I'm sure Kelly feels the same way, and Summer as a parent of an individual with autism, the school should be doing everything they can before it gets to that point, like saying like, I just don't know what to do with him. You know, take him home, or we can't do this anymore today. Because, you know, then that just creates a ripple effect, and, you know, we have, I would say probably 1 out of every 8 or 9 referrals, the individual's homeschooled because of having endured a situation like that for so long. So, you know, and it's really important, because then once you're homeschooled, then you're not getting socialization anymore, and then that's like, it just compounds the issue exponentially. So there's a lot of issues at hand. You
So
know.
I think in the end, people need support, they need help, and people need to understand that we're a safe place to get that help.
Yes.
And if the teachers are trained and the school district knows, oh, hey, if we're struggling, maybe we can get the behavior analyst involved. And if we're all working together and not trying to scare everybody off, and like we all because anytime anybody tells you, I know everything about autism, I will fix everything, you should run, because they're wrong. And what you need is as many brains thinking about this. Okay, why is, you know, I had a little guy that liked to jump a fence, and he would go sit in his neighbor's living room. And I don't know why he liked the neighbor's living room better than his, but like we were like, what are we gonna do? He's always in the neighbor's living room. They didn't like that. They would prefer he not be in the living room. So, you know, we'd be sitting around, what are we gonna do about this? Do you know what fixed the issue? I said, let's try a stop sign on the fence. We put a stop sign on the back fence, he quit jumping it because he was a rule follower. So is that gonna work with, is every kid that's jumping a fence, a stop sign gonna work? No. I got lucky, okay? So like, that's why it takes everybody working together and understanding, no, we don't know all this. And when somebody's like, okay, I don't know what else to do, what about if we tried this? Yeah. And it depends on this, day, and that. And you need open-minded folks who are willing to be creative and think outside the box and continue to problem solve. So we're supposed to be there for the schools to help them.
Right, we're there to help them.
And we're not there to scare them. We're really supposed to be there to help.
Right. Well, that communication is so important too, because I was telling a story of a young boy that I was working with where I had a cell phone in my pocket. I was at the school I was working, and you know, I'm not someone, I've had some experience with special education, things like that, but he had reached into my pocket like to grab my phone out, and I come from a background where, you know, I assume the worst of things, and you know, I don't know his intentions, but communicating with the team, I understood that, oh, he just wanted me to take his picture while he was doing something. And it's that idea that if there's not that communication there, I could have thought any number of things that he was attempting to do. And how many times do they come into contact with people in the school, at home, out in public, that just don't understand it. And so like, but that to me, if there's someone in the school who's advocating and communicating the needs and how, you know, to the best of their ability what they know, then that helps me as a teacher understand it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It really is all about coordinating care and having a team approach. Because the more people who know what's going on and are on the same page, you know, the better the outcome for that individual, and you know, having a successful life as it means to them to have a successful life.
Well, I think we're at the end of our time. I'm sure we'll hang around if people have remaining questions, but thank you all so much. When we get this plan put together, I'm sending it to you to look at.
We'll keep thinking
I have
of
their
ideas.
emails.
I'll make it, do the homework.
Yeah, in a perfect world, I'll keep thinking.
Yeah, and it's important though, and I think too often candidates and legislators don't think first about what communities actually need, and that's why we're in the situation we are. So thank you all for sharing your knowledge. Summer, thank you for organizing. We're always happy to be
Thank you
down
guys for
here.
coming down.
So-
I appreciate you guys taking the time. Thank you.
Thanks for inviting us.
We love to
I
do
do
this.
want to get it out there. We didn't kind of skipped it earlier. It is 1 in 59 in Missouri that has been diagnosed with autism, and the numbers keep going up. Thank you, Chief.
You're the reason it happened. You told me it was there. I'm like, oh my god.
Guys.
The guilty party's being filmed tonight.
Yeah, 1 in 59. The numbers keep going up. What were you telling me earlier? What, in 2 generations, 3 generations, that'll be the norm?
Yeah.
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 Wow.
That'll be still
Yeah, and
paranormal.
without intervention,
normal,
yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So there's a statistic in our autism training, the very first parent training lesson. In this year, more children will be diagnosed with autism than they will be with cancer, diabetes, and what else is it? HIV, AIDS.
Wow.
Combined. So, and it's just, you know, we're learning more about how to diagnose, more physicians are able to diagnose, people have greater access. And also, you know, things are changing and that affects our neurological makeup, so, you know.
And I just wanted to thank all of you for being here. I've learned a lot. I really appreciate all of your talent and all of your knowledge. And, you know, Summer has been a good friend for several years now.
I tried. We're going to try harder this election season.
I appreciate all you've done. So thank you so much for having us. Thanks for coming.
Thank you guys. Seriously.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, I can talk about autism all day long.
And that is what I
Got 10%.
Yes. And you get me off on